You're listening to The Content of Character, a podcast on the ethical sayings of Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, with Shaykh Yahya Rhodus of al-Maqasid. This podcast is powered by Seekers Hub Global. Visit seekershub.org for online courses, our Q&A service with reliable scholars, and engaging media.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam ajma'een. Welcome to episode 72 of the Content of Character podcast. Today we will be discussing concern for neighbors. The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam said, لَيْسَ الْمُؤْمِنُ بِالَّذِي يَشْبَعُ وَجَارُهُ جَائِعٌ إِلَى جَنْبِهِ. A believer is not one who eats his fill while his next door neighbor goes hungry. This is related by Imam al-Bukhari in his collection al-Adab al-Mufrad, as well as other scholars of hadith as well. And we find this construction, لَيْسَ الْمُؤْمِنُ, a believer is not one who. In other sayings of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in a hadith in the collection of Imam Ahmad in his Musnad, لَيْسَ الْمُؤْمِنُ بِالطَّعَانٍ وَلَا لَعَّانٍ وَلَا الْفَاحِشِ الْبَذِيءِ. A believer is not one who hurts others with his words, who curses others, who is indecent and obscene. In another hadith in al-Tabarani, لَيْسَ الْمُؤْمِنُ الَّذِي لَا يَأْمَنُ جَارُهُ بَوَائِقَهُ. A believer is not one who his neighbor is not safe from his evil. And so by the Prophet negating the fact that when we do these things we're not believers, what he means by this is al-kamal al-iman. We're not true believers. We have not reached the higher degrees of faith. And this is indicating here that whatever it is that is mentioned is something that we should take seriously. So even though that we just said that, meaning that it means we haven't reached the perfection of faith, the higher degrees of faith, it still is a very serious warning that we don't do these things that our Prophet is mentioning. So if we go back to this hadith, لَيْسَ الْمُؤْمِنُ بِالَّذِي يَشْبَعُ وَجَارُهُ جَائِعٌ إِلَى جَنْبِهِ. A believer is not one who eats his fill while his next door neighbor goes hungry. This is one of the many sayings of our Prophet ﷺ that indicate the importance of neighbors. The importance of neighbors. Our Prophet said ﷺ in another hadith is that Gabriel continued to counsel me to take care of my neighbor to the point that I thought he was going to grant my neighbor a share in my inheritance, a share in the inheritance. And that when we look at our neighbors, that the scholars have defined for us what constitutes a neighbor. Some of them say that it is 7 houses in each direction. Others have extended that all the way up until 40. And when we think about that, we can think about how short we fall in the modern world, and how oftentimes that we completely neglect our next door neighbor, let alone those that are 2 or 3 or 4 or 7 houses down. So this is something that our Prophet wants us to be aware of, and this is something that we should strive to put into practice. Now in this particular hadith is that our Prophet is teaching us about one thing in particular, and this is that us having enough food to fill our own stomachs, but our next door neighbor that not having enough food. And the way that the Prophet phrased this sallallahu alaihi wasallam, وَجَارُهُ جَائِعٌ, his neighbor is hungry, إِلَى جَنْبِهِ. So وَجَارُهُ إِلَى جَنْبِهِ جَائِعٌ is that while his next door neighbor goes hungry, literally إِلَى جَنْبِهِ, that the one who is next to him, the next door neighbor, the one who is right next to him, indicating here that if someone is next to you, you surely should know about what is happening if they're right next to you. And so how could it really be then that we have neighbors that have needs, in this case that a need for food, and we're not aware of it? This is that indicating that this is a very serious thing, a very serious state of heedlessness to be in, to not know the state of our believers. And the underlying assumption here is that if we're fulfilling the rights of our neighbors, is that we are not only greeting them, not only are we spending time with them, but we are aware of their condition and of their situation, so we can help them when they're in time of need. And feeding people in general is something that the Sharia encourages us to do, especially those in need, let alone those who have the haqq al-jiwar. They have the right of being our neighbor. And this is something that we need to be very careful of, not to be neglectful of the rights of our neighbors, to look after them, to take care of them. And of course, that as is mentioned in the previous hadith, to protect them from our own evil. And that we know that the right of the neighbor is great, and that as Imam al-Haddad teaches us, showing ihsan to them, excellence, is from the greatest affairs of this deen. But then he describes for us how we can show this ihsan. He says it is in the following way: بِكَفِّ الْأَذَى عَنْهُ, that we don't harm them in any way, وَاحْتِمَالُ الْأَذَى مِنْهُ, and by bearing any harm that comes to us from them. So we protect them from our harm, and we bear any harm that comes to us from them. مَاسْتِنَاءٍ الْمَعْرُوفِ, while doing good things for them. وَبَذْلَ الْإِحْسَانِ إِلَيْهِ حَسَبَ الْإِسْتِطَاعَةِ, and showing excellence towards them to the extent possible. And that this is the description of the believer who again has complete faith. And he quotes another hadith of our Prophet, أَحْسَنْ مُجَاوَرَةَ مَنْ جَاوَرَكَ, that show ihsan to your neighbor. And literally it means is that show goodness to the one who is in your vicinity, the one who is next to you, and you will be a believer. And then there are various degrees, though, if we say that the neighbor extends up to 7 houses, or maybe even up to 40, is that the ones that are closer to you have an even greater right, and the neighbor's door that is closest to your door has the greatest right of all of the others. And then Imam Haddad mentions a story that indicates how the Salaf as-Salih, the righteous predecessors before us, went to great lengths to show ihsan to their neighbors and to make sure that they weren't a cause of harm for them. And he mentions that there was one household where they had mice in their household, and it was said to them, why don't you get a cat? So then that cat can push those mice out of the house. And the neighbors, the household owner said, is that I fear that if the mice leave my house, they're going to go to my neighbor's house, and that would be considered to be a way of harming them. Now, that in our time would be something that most people could never ever implement. But just the fact that we have someone who was thinking in that way, that they actually cared about this reality so much, is that they would go to that extent where they would actually tolerate having mice in their own house so that their neighbor wouldn't be afflicted with that. That is amazing to think about that. And if we can't reach that degree, we should at least make sure to uphold the basic degree of the rights that our deen has given the neighbor. And that when we look at those rights, is that they are clarified for us in a hadith of our Prophet. أَتَدْرِي مَا حَقُّ الْجَارِ, do you know what the right of the neighbor really is, or the rights of the neighbor really are? إِذَا اسْتَعَانَكَ عَنْتَ, when he seeks your help, you help him. وَإِذَا اسْتَقْرَضَكَ أَقْرَضْتَ, if he seeks to borrow money from you, that you lend it to him. وَإِذَا افْتَقَرَ عُدْتَ عَلَيْهِ, as when he is in need financially, is that you help him. وَإِذَا مَرِضَ عُدْتَ, when he falls ill, that you visit him. وَإِذَا صَابَهُ خَيْرٌ هَنَّأْتَ, if some good befalls him, is that you congratulate him. وَإِذَا صَابَتْهُ مُصِيبَةٌ عَزَّيْتَ, and if he's afflicted with hardship, is that you console him. وَإِذَا مَاتَ اتَّبَعْتَ جَنَازَتَهُ, and if he dies, that you follow his funeral procession. وَلَا تَسْتَطِلْ عَلَيْهِ بِالْبَنَاءِ, and don't build high. فَتَحْجُبْ عَنْهُ الرِّيحِ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِهِ, such that you prevent fresh air from that coming to him, unless that you have his permission to do so. وَلَا تُؤْذِي بِقُطَارِ قِدْرِكَ, and do not harm him with the scent that comes from your cooking pot. إِلَّا أَن تَغْرِفَ لَهُ مِنْهَا, unless that if you're going to give him a portion. وَنِشْتَرَيْتَ فَاكِهَةً, and if you buy fruits, فَهْدِي لَهُ, that gift some to him. فَإِن لَمْ تَفْعَلْ, and if you don't do this, فَأَلْخِلْهَا سِرًّا, that bring them secretly into your house. وَلَا يَخْرُجْ بِهَا وَلَدُكَ لِيَغِيظَ بِهَا وَلَدَهُ. And don't let your child go outside such that the other children see him and it makes them feel that they don't have something that someone else does. Amazing etiquettes. This is the beauty of our deen. And when we bring life to these etiquettes, we bring life to relationships in society, and we bring life to relationships in society. So much good comes from that. And this is very, very important that we take these etiquettes seriously, and we ask Allah to forgive us for our negligence and our that lack of ability to do what it is that we've been commanded to do. May Allah Ta'ala bless us to be from those who give our neighbors their rights, and to go beyond that, where we also show ihsan and excellence to them in all of our different states and everything that it is that we do. Ya Rabbil Alameen, we ask you for tawfiq in all of our different affairs. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadan wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.